What's up, you guys? Michael here. Now, I often come on YouTube and break down various investments and hopefully provide some content that is, both motivational and useful and beneficial to you guys. One of the most common topics that I talk about is investing in real estate, more specifically in short-term rental properties to list on Airbnb. And I'll often talk about the cash flow numbers, what we're going to gain from appreciation forecasts and equity gained from principal paydown and things of that nature. And it may sound like a walk in the park, but it's not always that easy. So I figured today was a good opportunity to tell you guys about some of the horror stories that we have experienced on Airbnb. Honestly, a lot of the comments I get on TikTok and on other social media platforms is, what about the headaches dealing with Airbnb? You must get squatters all the time. And I'm just gonna go ahead and nip that right in the bud. I have never even heard of a squatter staying in Airbnb beyond their stay and refusing to leave. I'm sure it's happened before, but I have never personally experienced that. If you guys are in a specific market that is designed to attract, tourists or people going on vacation, you really should never experience squatters, especially if you're vetting the guests that are coming in each week. So if you guys hang around till the end, I will reveal some funny stories. I guess you could consider them horror stories in some aspect, at least from an Airbnb host perspective. And I will also share some photos from the crime scenes, if you will. Not actually crime scenes, but you get the point. Now, before we begin, I do have an important ask. If you guys don't mind, just giving the like button right down there a little tap, just the slightest tap. It honestly helps with the almighty YouTube gods and the almighty YouTube algorithm. So I genuinely appreciate that. Also, feel free to subscribe below if you haven't already. If you guys find any value in this type of content, it really means a lot to me if you subscribe. It helps me grow this channel. Okay, where to start? How about our very first ever Airbnb guest? We listed our very first rental property, which is located in Nashville, Tennessee, on Airbnb on December 16th, my birthday actually, in 2019. And we were so nervous, didn't really know how to do our pricing, didn't know how to market the property and things of that nature. So we didn't know what to expect, and we didn't know how long it would take to get bookings or how much money we would really make when we first started. So we just went for it, and we learned as we went. But we actually got our first inquiry and our first booking on December 16th on the very first day. We were so excited and so nervous at the same time. The booking was a little sketchy. The person had no photo, no prior reviews, which is a little bit of a red flag, but it can also just mean they're a new user to Airbnb. Turns out that the guy was booking on behalf of an aquatic management company, people that train lifeguards and things like that, for some foreign exchange students/workers on a special visa in the United States, and they were staying in Nashville for a few months and were looking for a furnished place to stay. After much deliberation and going back and forth, my wife and I ultimately accepted the booking, and I actually went and met the guy in person to show him around the house to make sure that I felt more comfortable with the booking going through. Now, what I had not come to realize until later on, about halfway through the reservation had already happened, is that gentleman was not actually staying at the Airbnb, which is a big no-no on Airbnb rules, and we do not allow that ever for people to book on others' behalfs. But we had already had the guests in there and we're really nervous, so we just said, all right, we'll just finish the stay and see how it goes. The guests had booked for an entire month, so that was really good. We were able to cover all our expenses the first month we were operating and turned a little bit of a profit. But when we went to check the place out after the guests had checked out, this is what we found. The house was a mess. It wasn't damaged in any way necessarily, but there was marks all over the walls. The bathrooms were disgusting. There was hair everywhere. They just did not keep the place in good condition while they were living there. And on top of that, they ransacked the entire place. We had coffee, K-cups. We had over 900 cups of coffee that was stuffed in the cupboard there that was for future guests just to use at their discretion. Again, it's designed for shorter term stays, so we didn't really think anybody was going to take all of it. And in addition to that, they took everything that was incidentals that we had provided. They took some towels, they took all of the laundry pods, they took all of the dish pods and detergent, they took all of the trash bags, some Tupperware, I mean, everything. And this stuff is provided to guests to use at their discretion, but not to abuse it. And I know they didn't do over 330 loads of laundry. So what we did is we went around the house, took a deep breath, and we took pictures of everything that was either damaged or missing or stolen, and we made notes of this, right? So when you go into Airbnb, you can actually submit a claim as long as you have photos to back it up and the original, cost or receipts or the cost to replace the item, or even just a ballpark estimate of the replacement item. You can submit a claim and the guest has the opportunity to actually pay you out on that. And if they don't, Airbnb has what's called a host guarantee, and they will actually pay you out as long as you submit the right amount of evidence. The totals added up to over $400. I think it was around $450. And thankfully, the gentleman who booked the place, he was actually very upset and disappointed with the younger folks that he was renting the place for, and they paid us in full with no questions asked. So the biggest pain as an Airbnb host when you're managing is just to figure out a way to restock the place, especially if you're not living nearby. Since this was our first one and we live nearby, we just went to Sam's Club and replaced everything, all the coffee pods and things like that, and just restocked the house for our next guest. But of course, as anybody might think, after our first guest experience, we were like, oh my gosh, what did we just get ourselves into? Is every guest gonna treat our house like this? And are we in for a world of disaster? Thankfully, the next several guests eased our mind. We had several great groups that came in just for long weekends to enjoy Nashville and the live music. And the house was left, in tremendous condition for the most part, and started to make really good money. Fast forward just a few months, in March of 2020, we went under contract for another rental property in downtown Nashville. And we were in the process of closing when all the craziness with COVID happened and all the shutdowns started to happen between, I think, March and May. And we had a ton of cancellations at our other place, so we were super nervous and had to lower our prices, and we're in the midst of closing on a new property. Are we gonna go through with this? We ultimately did, and the property was left vacant for probably 5 days in the time period of once we had it furnished how we wanted and it was ready to go. We were waiting on the city of Nashville to approve our permit because there's a certain permitting process with regards to zoning and occupancy, and you have to pay for a permit that you have to renew every year. So after that 5-day period, we had the permit. We went back to the house to check in before we officially listed it on Airbnb. We opened the door and it was 102 degrees inside. I shit you not, we walked in and immediately started sweating, and there was almost a haze inside the townhouse. There was water all over the kitchen floor. A pipe had burst, I imagine from the heat, underneath the fridge, and it was just soaking on the floor. I don't know how long it's been sitting there. It was so hot that the sap was oozing out and bubbling out of the wooden side table or lampshade in the living room. And it was a disaster. And we ultimately called an HVAC person. They came over and they told us it was an issue with the Nest thermostat because it was set to 72 cool, but it continued to blow nothing but smoking hot air. So while it registered cool and it was working harder and harder and harder to cool the place because it kept getting hotter, it was just a never-ending cycle. And it was over 100 degrees for a minimum of 24 hours. We don't really know how long. Luckily, he fixed it. We cleaned up the water, got the replacement part for the fridge, and we were all squared away, and we had our first guest in that place just a few days later. We're very thankful that this happened before we actually listed the place, and obviously while we were close by, because if we weren't, it would have been a little bit more of a headache, but still doable. We just would have had to call an HVAC technician to go out and probably refund guests if guests were staying there when the temperature started cranking up like that. Around the same time, as I mentioned before, the prices had to drop because tourism was basically non-existent for several months in Nashville. So we were trying to cater toward people who are in town for work, maybe they're essential work, nurses, contractors, construction, and things like that. So we lowered our prices, made it more accommodating for longer term stays. So people looking to stay for 1 to 4 weeks at a time, maybe more. And we had one group come in that ended up being a local group, and we were very nervous about it, but they lied to us while they were staying, and they actually threw a party. So we're very, very strict about evaluating our guests now. So they threw a party and they had about 20 people there. And honestly, when they checked out, everything was pretty much okay with the house. There was a lot of marks on the walls, which we had to just do touch-up paint. But they broke a coffee table, an $800 coffee table. It was one of the nicer pieces in our living room. And we had to charge them for that, along with other damages. They also smoked cigarettes in the house, which is strongly prohibited in any of our rentals. We found ashes on the kitchen table, so it was pretty obvious. They didn't hide it. It smelled really bad. So we had to do an ozone treatment and also buy a new coffee table and replace it. So it was over $1,000 worth of damage. And they actually ghosted us and refused to pay. So Airbnb took the security deposit, paid us out, and they actually paid us out to the penny, all, just over $1,000 worth of damages. And we're thankful for Airbnb following through with their host guarantee, because again, we took great evidence and photos and showed that in the process where you're actually making these claims. So we're very grateful that Airbnb paid us out, but it was a headache nonetheless. So that was one of the worst guests we've ever had, and don't be scared. Most of the time, these guests are not this bad. Fast forward to the fall of 2020. A guest was complaining at our townhouse in Nashville. It's an older place built in the 1980s, that the sink in the kitchen was backing up especially when they did the dishwasher, and there was a pretty foul smell coming. So I went over in between guests, and I had the bright idea of, I could fix it. I'm basically a plumber now since I own some rental properties. I grabbed a plunger from the bathroom, and I just started plunging away at the kitchen sink. Couple plunges, I heard some stuff get pushed through. I said, oh, this is working. Let me give it one or two really big plunges to get the last bit out. And on the very last one, I think it was the 5th time I shoved that thing in the sink, the entire sink just went straight through the counter and fell all the way into the bottom of the cabinet. And my heart just absolutely sunk into my stomach. All I hear is my wife in the living room saying, "What did you do?" And I just replied, "Nothing good. Don't come in here." And we called around and asked a bunch of folks and contractors to see if they can come out and do the work. A lot of them were unavailable. We had guests coming in the next day at 4 p.m. and it was around 12 p.m. the day before. So we were honestly pooping our pants, super nervous. Fortunately, I knew a builder in the area, and through investing, you really do get to network with a lot of talented people. And this guy was very generous with his time. And we said, I don't care really what it costs, Ben. Just come on over and please figure out a way. If we need to get a new sink, we'll do that. But ultimately, it was a kind of a quick fix. They just put new adhesive and new latches underneath the sink and re-secured it underneath the granite countertop. And ultimately, the problem was a rusty garbage disposal. So that's what was causing the clog. It actually wouldn't even turn on. So we got a new garbage disposal. So now the garbage disposal works and we have a functioning sink that's not clogged up. But yeah, that was not necessarily a Airbnb guest horror story. That was an Airbnb host just being really stupid. That's my horror story. So that was self-inflicted and cost around $580 to fix. So that one's on me. Now, one occurrence that happened about, a month ago, and this guest was actually very genuine. He sent us a message, extremely apologetic. He said, one of my buddies jumped on the pull-out couch and it's broken. There's no fixing it. He's like, it's a goner. So I was like, okay, this must be really, really broken. And I was like, thank you so much for being honest with me. Not all guests are that honest and upfront, so I was extremely appreciative of him being, upfront. Obviously, we're going to find the issue, one, because they couldn't even get the pull-out couch to close back into the couch, but two, it really just helps us address the issue and get the replacement couch in there before the next guest. So this one was a headache. We had to go get rid of the other couch and then stop by some local furniture stores to buy a new pull-out couch that was of similar quality and of similar price. Thankfully, like I said a second ago, he was very genuine and said, let us know how much it costs. We'll pay you out immediately. Again, I'm sorry for the trouble. We really enjoyed your place. And everything else in the house was perfect. So while this took us a few hours to find the new couch and get it in there and get the house squared away, it wasn't the end of the world. I think this would have been more difficult if we weren't local. That's why I recommend people have handymen or cleaners that you have a prearranged agreement with, that if there's a major issue like that, they're able to address it for you, and you just say, hey, I'll pay you for your time, and you just invoice me whatever parts and materials are involved with the issue, and I'll pay that as well. There are several other minor stories that I could bore you guys with today, most of which are around like stained towels or stained sheets or something of that nature. The place was a little dirty, but that's why you need to hire professional cleaners, because they're tremendous and they take great care of the property and they document anything or any damage that has occurred. They send it to us, and if they cannot get, said stains out of the towels or sheets, for example, we actually just charge the guest typically, or if it's a small expense, we'll just eat it and just restock it with new towels on our own dime. At the end of the day, the cash flow and all the positives of investing in short-term vacation rentals certainly, in our opinion at least, outweigh the negatives or the horror stories that you hear about. And I'll just say it again, I don't know why everybody asks me about squatters on TikTok, but that is like the least of my worries. Most people you see that are flying in from afar with a family or with friends, and they're just staying for 3 days and they have a flight to catch and leave. They pay a security deposit. So unless you're in very cheap housing and you're just looking to maybe sleep 1 or 2 people, you may have an issue if that's the case, but you guys just have to make sure you do a good job vetting your guests and understanding why they're in town visiting, and hopefully you guys have no issues with squatting either. I don't want this to scare you guys off. I just wanted to make sure I'm not just painting a pretty picture 100% of the time, because every once in a while you're gonna have some moments where you freak out and you have to jump to find, creative ways to solve a problem. And during those times, it may eat up some of your valuable time more so than you're used to. I just wanna reiterate, guys, that the cash flow and the overall potential to achieving financial freedom with just a few short-term rentals highly, by a long shot, outweighs any of the negatives or horror stories that you've heard from me or from any other people. And outside of a few of these, few and far between circumstances, we rarely spend more than an hour a week managing our listings. So it's pretty much as close as you can get to passive income without having a property manager run the whole operation. And like I've said in other videos, it's not worth spending 15 to 40% of your gross revenue to pay someone else to manage your properties if you guys have an hour a week to do it yourself. Don't forget to drop your comments below. I want to hear from you guys. What horror stories have you either experienced or heard about? I always love hearing other people's stories because sometimes they crack me up, sometimes they help me and my wife prepare for potential future issues, and we can avoid them by learning from other people's mistakes. So don't forget to drop your comments or questions below. Happy to hop on there and answer as many of them as I can. But thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give me some love, hit the like button, subscribe below, and I hope to see you guys again very soon.